Hey, Dimona. A word you won't find in United Nations documents. A city you won't find on any official list of the world's military facilities. And yet, for decades it has helped decide whether the Middle East goes up in flames or survives. In June 2005, Iran and Israel slid into an open shadow war. Drones, missiles, sabotage. And in the background of all that, one question that keeps generals awake at night. Does Israel have the bomb? And a second, even more uncomfortable. Would it use it? This episode wasn't made to scare you. It was made to show why Israel built a bomb no one has ever officially seen, and everyone is afraid of. And what that means now, as Iran inches towards its own nuclear threshold. Let's begin. How did Israel build a weapon no one talks about, but everyone fears? Dimona. If you type that name into Google Maps, you'll see a small town in the south of Israel, the Negev Desert. 30,000 residents, an old railway line, neighborhoods of immigrants from Morocco, Yemen, Russia, an ordinary town, only on the surface. Because on its outskirts, behind barbed wire and white gates bristling with cameras, sits something that officially does not exist. If you ask the Israeli Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, or the Army spokesperson, does Israel possess nuclear weapons? You would always hear the same answer. Israel will not be the first country to introduce nuclear weapons into the region. Sounds clever, right? No confirmation, no denial. But the world has drawn its own conclusions, because Israel has the bomb. Not one, not a cobbled-together prototype, but a systematic, strategic, and completely unofficial nuclear arsenal. Roughly between 80 and 300 warheads. On land, under the sea, in the air, and yet no one boasts about it. Because Israel has never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Because Dimona does not exist in UN paperwork. Because every Western politician who ever asked about Dimona somehow stopped asking. This is the story of a state that built a nuclear weapon in the shadows. Against every treaty, without fanfare, without tests. Without parades, and it did not build it to attack. It built it so that it would never again be attacked the way it was in 1948. After the Shoah, after the War of Independence, after attacks from every direction, Israel told itself one thing: never again, without a nuclear option. That is how the story of Dimona begins. The story of a facility no one had seen. That changed the course of Middle Eastern history. A story with no official dates but with consequences no one can erase. In this episode, we will go back to the 1950s, when it all began. Trace how France and West Germany helped build something that officially wasn't allowed to exist. Show how Dimona became the center of Israel's deterrence strategy. Unpack what the doctrine of ambiguity really means. Look at how close the world came to nuclear war in 1973. And ask what all this means now, as Iran pushes its own program, and we'll try to answer the question, would Israel really drop a nuclear bomb if it had no other choice? This is an episode about a bomb that doesn't exist, but one that has stopped more wars than any United Nations resolution, and about a state that built its independence not just on an army, but on silence. Silence so powerful it's louder than an explosion. Why did Israel decide it had to have the bomb? You don't build a nuclear program out of physicists, concrete, and reactors alone. You need one more thing. Fear. The kind that stops you sleeping. Israel didn't start working on nuclear weapons because it was strong. It started because it never again wanted to be weak. That's not a mistake, that's the logic. For many Israeli leaders, the Holocaust is not just history. It's an argument. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, said it openly. If there is ever again a threat to Israel's existence, we must have an option that makes the enemy hesitate. Even for a second. It was 1955, 6 years after the creation of the state, 8 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, and no one harbored any illusions. The world would not lift a finger if Israel once again stood on the edge of the abyss. Ben-Gurion didn't want a second Mossad. He wanted Israel to be Mossad, with a nuclear warhead on the roof. In the summer of 1957, Israeli intelligence put a note on his desk. The French are ready to help. Quietly, with no paper trail, condition, no official documents. Why France? Because Paris was furious with the US and the UK over the Suez Crisis. Because France already had nuclear weapons research behind it. Because it wanted a partner that would be loyal. Israel offered silence cooperation with Mossad laboratories and discreet permission to test some weapons technologies deep in the desert. The French said yes, and Dimona was born. Officially, though, it was no Dimona. It was a textile plant, with 7 underground levels, a reactor, and a cooling system. From the start, Israel knew one thing. We cannot have this weapon officially, but we must have it for real. Why? Because if they announced it to the world, the UN would impose sanctions, the US could block military aid, the Arab world would have a ready-made pretext for war. So the doctrine of nuclear ambiguity was created, strategic uncertainty. In simple terms, we won't say we have the bomb, but if we do, don't even think about testing it. It's like keeping a gun under the table but letting the barrel stick out just enough for everyone to see it. Holocaust memory as a doctrine of deterrence? There is no other country that has fused its history so tightly with its military doctrine. In the US, the bomb was a tool of victory. In the Soviet Union, a counterweight to the West. In Israel, it was an insurance policy on survival. The Holocaust was not just an atrocity. It became the argument for everything. For mandatory military service, for a strong air force, for a nuclear reserve, for never trusting alliances alone. Because in 1939, the Allies also had treaties. And no one stopped the trains to Auschwitz. Throughout the construction period between 1958 and 1964, no one said bomb. They used phrases like installation, industrial facility, security site, research center. Everyone in the know signed a lifelong secrecy clause. There were no photos, no notarial deeds, no cabinet decisions written down. But Dimona was rising, and beneath it, the plutonium stockpile grew. Time for a quote that says it all. Moshe Dayan, former defense minister, "We do not want the bomb in order to use it, but its existence is part of our moral right to exist. No one else will decide for us whether we have the right to live." Israel did not build the bomb out of pride, not out of a great power complex, not for the sake of a military parade. It built it out of fear, out of distrust, out of the conviction that the world might once again fall silent, and then no one would ever again have the chance to speak. Because Dimona was not just a secret, it was the best protected lie of the 20th century. The plant that doesn't exist. How Israel hid Dimona from the world. This is not a story about technology. It's a story about illusion. About masterful camouflage. About state-run theater. Israel didn't just build Dimona. It built a world in which Dimona does not exist. And for decades it made that world hold. With the help of silence's false names, polite lies, and the West's deliberate blindness. It started in the 1950s. In the Negev, an industrial zone was marked out. On paper, a textile processing plant. In reality, a 7-story underground complex with a water-cooled reactor and assembly halls. The French delivered the know-how. The Israelis provided the people. All under the code name Project 953. Above ground, a concrete bunker, a guard booth, a gate with the sign Dimona Textile Research Center. Below, nuclear physics labs, enrichment machinery, declassification chambers. The official policy was Amimut, strategic ambiguity. Every Israeli prime minister, when asked by journalists or diplomats about nuclear weapons, answered in exactly the same way. Israel will not be the first country to introduce nuclear weapons into the region. That sentence became a mantra, not a lie, not the truth, a maneuver. When Washington asked, "Is Dimona a military reactor?" Israel replied, "It is a research installation for energy production." When the CIA demanded explanations for satellite images, Ben-Gurion said, "Nothing that cannot be explained." By 1960, American intelligence already had satellite photographs. Thermal analysis showed activity consistent with a working reactor. Analysts wrote their report. This is not a civilian plant. This is the layout of a nuclear program. The U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower was briefed, and then nothing. Why? Because the U.S. was in deep crisis with the Soviet Union. Because Washington did not want to lose Israel as an ally. Because it knew an Israeli bomb could stabilize the Middle East through fear. That was the moment America quietly switched to don't ask, don't tell. Around Dimona, a system of masking interfaces was built. Workers had compartmentalized access. Many had no idea what others were doing. Official documents spoke of industrial research. Some rooms were staged as empty halls. There was even a tourist version, a small, controlled surface facility shown to visiting delegations. Example: in 1961, the Israeli government allowed American inspectors into Dimona, but they were shown only the ground floor. They signed a protocol. We found no evidence of nuclear weapons production. Of course not. They were never allowed to go downstairs. In 1986, Mordecai Vanunu, a technician from Dimona, fled to the UK and handed the press photos of the underground labs. The result? For the first time, the world saw what Dimona hid. Estimates appeared, between 80 and 200 nuclear warheads. The New York Times ran the headline, "Israel, the world's third nuclear power." And Israel? Mossad kidnapped Vanunu in Rome. He spent 18 years in prison, 11 of them in solitary confinement. The state said nothing in public about what he had revealed. Journalists asked, was what he showed true? The government spokesperson replied, "We do not comment on matters of national security." A voice from inside? Ehud Barak, former prime minister and general. Having the bomb and an unspoken right to use it is more powerful than showing it. When you keep a gun under the table but the barrel is visible, no one provokes you. Dimona is not just a place. It's a mechanism of invisibility. The reactor hidden behind concrete, the truth hidden behind a consensus of silence. The US knows, Europe knows, the UN knows, but no one talks. Because on this one issue, silence protects more lives than the truth. War and the shadow of the atom. How close was Israel to using a nuclear bomb? There was a day when Israel almost fell. Not metaphorically. Literally. 6th October 1973, Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Empty streets, full synagogues, radio off, television dark. And right then, at 2 p.m. sharp, the Egyptian and Syrian armies crossed the ceasefire lines. In Sinai and on the Golan Heights, hundreds of tanks, thousands of soldiers, waves of missiles. Israel, caught off guard, undermanned, reservists still at home. Shock in the eyes of the generals. And in the middle of that chaos, someone in an underground bunker opens a folder labeled Alternative Options. The plan for nuclear use. In the first 24 hours of the war, Egyptian forces break through the Bar-Lev line in Sinai. Syrians seize key positions on the Golan. The Israeli Air Force loses dozens of aircraft. The whole concept of deterrence begins to fall apart. Prime Minister Golda Meir convenes a crisis staff. Army commanders are in a panic. It's no longer about victory, it's about survival. And that's when the topic that was not supposed to exist enters the room. The nuclear option. This is not a movie script. It happened. Codename, Shachak Yarok. Green sky. Objective, prepare nuclear warheads for possible use in case the front collapses completely. At Tel Naf Air Base, the Israeli Air Force removes warheads from underground storage, mounts them on specialized carriers, A-4 Skyhawk bombers, orders pilots onto standby, orders them not to ask questions. According to Western analytical accounts, within 48 hours, Israel had 13 warheads ready. Not for a parade, not as a test, for actual use. The Americans notice unusual activity at southern bases. A CIA analysis team sends an urgent alert to the White House. Henry Kissinger, National Security Advisor, calls an emergency meeting. The U.S. reaction? Immediate. An airlift. Hundreds of tons of ammunition, equipment, spare parts, satellite support, and a silent assurance, "Don't use that, we'll help." There is no official transcript of that conversation. But Kissinger is reported to have said, "If they go nuclear, the Middle East burns, and we burn with it." Who really had their finger on that button? Journalists have been asking for decades, was Israel really ready to drop the bomb? Answers differ. But one thing is clear. The plan existed, preparations began, and Golda Meir literally had in front of her a decision paper signed by the general staff. Did she seriously consider it? According to her biographers, she was close to tears, but calm. She decided that if the U.S. did not help, she would have no choice. But the U.S. did help, and the bomb stayed in Dimona's underground. A voice from inside? Avner Cohen, historian and author of Israel and the Bomb. This was the closest moment in Israel's history to a real possibility of using nuclear weapons. Not as blackmail, as desperation. After the Yom Kippur War, something strange happened. No Arab state has ever again attacked Israel in a full-scale, conventional way. Egypt signed peace. Syria kept the status quo. Iran, after the revolution, started its own nuclear program. The world understood one thing: Israel is not bluffing, and the bomb that doesn't exist is very real. Comparison: in the history of the UK, there has never been a moment when the state itself had to seriously decide whether to push a nuclear trigger under direct invasion conditions. You can compare it instead to moments like the decision to join major wars, the debate over nuclear deterrence from British soil moments, when a state decides not just about war, but about its future as a nation. In 1973, Israel was one step away from a decision whose consequences would have been irreversible. And yet that day, the weapon that mattered most was the one that didn't explode. It was the war that almost became the first nuclear conflict in the region, not out of ambition, out of survival. And that is the key to understanding that Israel's nuclear weapons are not for show. They exist so that they never have to be used, and everyone knows it. How does Israel's nuclear strategy actually work? The U.S. says it outright: we have the bomb. We tested it. We used it. Russia tests and threatens. China develops quietly. North Korea fires missiles as a demonstration. France and the UK have warheads you can read about in textbooks. And Israel? Silence. No official statements, no tests, no photos of warheads. And yet everyone factors them into their calculations. Because Israel is the only state on Earth whose nuclear weapons are never spoken about, but are treated as a fact. And that is its greatest strength. The doctrine of Amimut, silence that scares more than a blast. In Israel they call it Amimut, ambiguity. It's not an accident. It's a strategy. A deliberate decision by the state not to confirm and not to deny. You don't say, "We have the bomb." You say, "We will not be the first to use it in the region." And that's it. The effect? No full-scale international pressure. No sanctions for breaking the NPT, because Israel never signed it. Full control over the narrative Israel's bomb is like Schrödinger's cat. It exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Until someone actually sees it, no one can prove it's there. But everyone assumes it is. Example, in Pentagon analyses you see the phrase undeclared arsenal. Within NATO, regional nuclear factor. Even Iran, in official statements, talks about Israeli weapons that have never been officially acknowledged. And that's enough to deter, because no one risks striking a country that may have a bomb 20 minutes away from their capital. Why does the world accept this? Because the U.S. has an unspoken deal with Israel. You don't talk about the bomb, we won't either. Europe treats Israel as too strategic to provoke. Russia is busy elsewhere. The UN has no way to investigate formally, because Israel never signed the NPT. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? Israel never joined. Therefore, it doesn't have to admit inspectors. It has no reporting obligations. It's the biggest legal loophole in today's nuclear order. In 2000, new details leaked out. Israel was buying Dolphin-class submarines from Germany, with modified launch systems. On board, the ability to fire missiles with nuclear warheads. That's called second strike capability, meaning, even if you wipe us out, our submarines will hit back. It's not just a weapon. It's the end of a war before it starts. No one can win against a country that has the last word after its own death. A voice from inside? Ephraim Halevi, former Mossad chief. The less we talk about that weapon, the more it works. It's like a black belt in judo. You don't have to use it, it's enough that people see it. In Arab countries, Israel's bomb is both taboo and obsession. In Iran, the official justification for its own program. In Palestinian discourse, proof of a strategic imbalance. But no one disputes one thing. If Israel wants to, it can, and that's enough. No one needs to see the bomber. It's enough to know it could take off. In public debates in the US and UK, you often hear about the nuclear umbrella, deterrence, extended guarantees. All of that is formal, open, treaty-based. Israel? No NATO. No alliance guarantees. No written security pledges. Only silence. And a threat no one wants to put to the test. The fact that Israel has never officially announced it has the bomb. That is its most powerful weapon. Because silence generates fear. And fear holds the peace better than many treaties. Maybe that's why, for decades, no one has dared go too far. How has Israel eliminated other people's nuclear programs? Israel has lived by one rule for half a century. We cannot allow the bomb to end up in the wrong hands. It's not jealousy, it's strategic survival. So Israel didn't just build its own arsenal, it also did everything it could to stop anyone else in the region from doing the same. No resolutions, no UN votes, no public threats. Just this. Someone disappears. And a program suddenly runs into difficulties. Case 1, 1981, Operation Opera. How Israeli F-16s wiped out Saddam Hussein's reactor Baghdad, Iraq. The Osirak nuclear reactor. French technology, European equipment, enrichment systems. Officially, research. Unofficially, Saddam's bomb. Israel didn't wait for a debate. On the night of 7th or 8th of June 1981, 8 Israeli F-16s flew hundreds of kilometers across the desert. A precise strike. The reactor destroyed in 90 seconds. No civilian casualties. Saddam, humiliated. The world, outraged. The UN condemned. The US disapproved. But years later, Washington admitted that raid delayed Iraq's nuclear ambitions by 10 to 15 years. Israel called it preemptive defense. The rest of the world understood, if you're building a bomb, better not do it in the Middle East. Case 2. Iran. If Iraq was an open punch, Iran has been a war in the shadows. The Iranian nuclear program has been running since the 1990s. Israel didn't wait for a finished warhead. It struck before the uranium dust could settle in the centrifuges. Examples? 2010-2012, 6 leading Iranian nuclear scientists killed, 2 more badly wounded. Methods? Car bombs, shots to the head, attacks from motorcycles in traffic. No one ever claimed responsibility. But everyone knew Mossad. 2010, the Stuxnet virus. A cyber attack on Iranian centrifuges at Natanz. A piece of malware so precise, it behaved like a guided missile. It reprogrammed the centrifuges so they ran off balance and destroyed themselves. More than 1,000 centrifuges were taken out. The program set back by around 2 years. Authors: the US and Israel, confirmed by an NSA leak in 2015. 2021. Explosion at the main nuclear facility in Natanz. Underground power lines destroyed. Sabotage. Carried out by a recruited employee. Who placed him there? Unofficially, Kedan, Mossad's unit for eliminations and special operations. Israel never says, "We will destroy your program." It just destroys it. Policy built on silence, no resolutions, no press conferences, no wagging fingers. It's like a surgeon removing a tumor before the scans are even printed. On paper, aggressive. In practice, effective. Because today, Iraq has no program. Syria's reactor was destroyed in 2007, another Israeli airstrike. Iran's project has been slowed and constantly sabotaged. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, don't dare talk openly about building bombs. A voice from the field? Tamir Pardo, former Mossad chief. We will not allow the bomb to fall into the hands of those who speak of wiping Israel off the map. If necessary, we'll act quietly, but we will act. The ethos of the first strike is part of the doctrine. Israel does not wait for a threat to materialize. It doesn't build weapons for just in case. It hits before the bomb is ready. That's not improvisation. It's the begin doctrine, formulated after the Osirak raid. We will never allow our enemies to obtain weapons that threaten our existence. That principle sits above alliances, the UN, and international law. Israel is not a nuclear power because it has warheads. It is a nuclear power because it controls the entire nuclear narrative of the region. When an adversary starts thinking about a bomb, Mossad already knows where he is, who he's talking to, and what he'll eat for breakfast tomorrow. And if he crosses the line, he disappears. No smoke, no bang. Just a small stain in history. Israel built the bomb not to drop it, but to make sure no one else dares drop anything on Israel. Today, after decades of silence, the adversary has a name, Iran, and its own nuclear program. Is the story of Dimona entering its final act? Will the bomb that doesn't exist be used for the first time? We don't know, but we know this. If that day ever comes, the world will not be the same afterwards. If you want to follow this story, hit subscribe, because this is just the beginning of a series about a conflict that could define the 21st century.